Well, morning, fellow zombies. What's going on? 2:33 in the morning. It is 81 degrees for a Thursday, June 17th, 2021. Yeah, my glasses still need to get cleaned and replaced. What can hell can I say? We were John C., the zombie, this morning of Roseman, California. And a very warm time for summer. I could talk about the weather, but how about heat of the political nature in the educational system? Yeah, groan and moan about this one, boys and girls, because this is going to be affecting all those who go to colleges left and right to see whether or not if they're thinking of the right ilk or not, especially in the state of California. Where this damn thing is in the state of California, when you're trying to get a job, the jobs are subject to what they call an at-will thing. It's been going on for several decades, apparently. Now, you can Google it and find out how long this damn thing's been going on. As I've said before to a lot of people in a lot of my videos, I've tried to keep a legal disclaimer of sorts. I'm not a guru at anything. I don't have any letters or expertise. I'm a student out of college myself. So, my own experiences, my own observations is what I say. I'm not there to control or guide anybody else. That's on them, not me. I'm not taking that kind of responsibility. Even if they are doing a cult following or not, I am not a cult leader. I am a guy talking about his own personal experiences and his own observations happening in his own life. That's what I am. That's what the disclaimer is. The Bakersfield newspaper, a couple of days ago, had posted a story concerning about two professors, former professors of it. The professors were contending that their freedom of speech was in violation of their own policies. Now, the thing of it is, we all know that we've already had our political differences going on, and we can thank whatever screwed up powers they are to bring us that divided and derided at this point. We've had other people saying that they want to make things great again, and they're going to try to do things differently. They don't like liberalism because liberalism usually has ideas and thoughts, and people don't like those kind of damn things because that hurts them too much, probably. I don't know. Observations these days. I've known some strong conservatives out there who actually had some ideas of how to interpret and how to make things more leaner, meaner, and yet more money in their pocket, so to speak. As much as I've been experiencing conservatism for the past few years, rather than the past several decades, I think I'll take the past several decades than over the past 4 or 5 years of what they consider quote unquote conservatism. But now here we go with the freedom of speech, because there's going to be a lot of people bitching and griping about the freedom of speech. And freedom of speech cases regarding federal courts usually go against a government body, not a corporate entity or a company. You can thank Citizen United for that one. But you also thank federal court cases that came up regarding how companies are being looked at. Companies being looked at individual properties. Now, I've done a few videos about this in general here, but in specific, we're dealing with a community college level in the state of California who's an at-will employer. Despite the fact they've got contracts telling people how long they've got, or if they got tenure, they got still contracts coming up to stay within their institution if they so choose, and to continue on with the job that they are employed by. Notice the word employed. So if you're an employer and you're working and you're the college at this point over here, you're the guy paying the paychecks to the people who are supposed to be performing up to a certain level of expectation. Your company also is dependent upon public donations, and not to mention state money coming in, not to mention federal grants coming in to keep your institution alive. But the thing of it is, if the institution is having feedback and drawback, they will do things to keep their institution and their idealism going, apparently. Now, if people have a dissenting viewpoint, they can, if they are allowed to, if the colleges actually have this written in their contract or in their bylaws and their bylines and stuff, if they're going to be allowing people to debate how a public school system is governed. Now keep this in mind, this is not a private entity we're talking about. We're talking about a public entity. We're talking about people coming in from the street to get an education, so they're going to be willing enough to pay an arm and a leg and then some, or go through grants and go through loans. But they're using public assistance one way or another to get into the educational system to get themselves bettered and enriched. Now, in situations like this, of course, professors are going to have their own viewpoints on how they're going to be doing their classes. They have to run it through their own department heads, which has to go through the chain of command. If the chain of command says, okay, it's still within policies, it's still within guidelines, go for it. They'll go for it. If the professors have been there for a long while and haven't had that much issues with anybody, you generally don't have any issues with anything else with the school system. But the last several years, last 4 to 5 years since we've had the other president in, former troublemaker, shall I say it, brought up some additional viewpoints that a lot of people have taken to heart and wonder if certain campuses out there are going to be stifling any chances of speaking. Now, the thing of it is, it's one thing if a student's going to be doing it, but a professor? Now, this is going to be a court case for people to look at and watch, because we're dealing with a contracted worker in a public education system. But the thing is, they're a contracted worker, and the worker is an employer. An employer is a college campus. Despite the fact they are getting public funds into them, they are still considered a public education, in my own opinion at this point, in my own observations, because of the situation here. We have an opportunity of watching this at play. Now, these two professors are conservative in their own nature. I'm not going to say names and I'm not going to say departments, but they have expressed some interest, and there has been documentation linked to their particular viewpoints. And some of the viewpoints happen to deal with public money that the school had been getting. And this information is available in the Bakersfield. You can see that online if you need to. So I'm drawing the information from my own memory as much as I read it. So don't quote me per se on this one. But what I'm trying to indicate at this point over here is we have a college situation as acting as an employer situation. Not as a government, not as a governing body that's setting out laws and rules and regulations, but they are setting out policies as a company and a corporation would and should. If they were considered a law enforcement entity or a law-making entity, then probably if some legal scholars and political scientists out there would look at it, would say that possibly, would say that this is a federal lawsuit valid. This is a valid lawsuit at this point over here. The stifling of freedom of speech curtailed by a governing body would be considered something for the federal courts. However, I got a feeling this is going to be tossed out. Mainly speaking, because the colleges are not law enforcement. They're not lawmaking. They are corporate entities of sorts. They make their own rules and regulations within their own guidelines. They have their own contracts with contracted workers. And therefore, looking at the professors as contracted workers, or currently former, they are going to be subject to the California state laws instead of a federal, in my own humble opinion. Now, there was, according to what the news article I was reading, they were arguing about the grant money. They felt the college was too liberal. Anything regarding conservative was getting themselves ignored, if I'm understanding the article correctly at this point over here. And because of the ignoring of this, there was supposed to be a public debate, and these professors were supposed to be going into the limelight to make their case to the public, and they refused. Let me back that up. They refused. However, months later, they decided to bring their own case. Now, this happened in 2019. Keep this in mind. We had President Trump in office. Yeah, you know, I'm liberal at this point over here, so anything regarding that T word I have a problem with. And of the mindset. But because of this mindset here, it seems like entitlement is going through everybody at this point. So that's also another personal observation. As I said before, this is all my personal opinions out there. I'm not trying to influence people. I'm just trying to say things off my head, especially at 2 o'clock in the morning when I wake up from damn nightmares. And I read another nightmare happening regarding our First Amendment issues that are going to be buried and squashed alive, and they should. As I said before, this happened in 2019. Now, a few months later into the same year, they began their own sessions with other people and other groups out there, trying to bring up their viewpoints in their own way to the public, including videos, to say how they felt concerning about a grant system being given to people who are, well, like-minded of the liberal, shall we say, instead of the conservative. And that the college campus was supporting a more liberal, political-based or biased institution. And anybody who isn't part of the program is getting scrutinized or laid off. And the thing of it is, at this point, these people tried to fight it out and got themselves investigated by the campus. And then the campus decided to terminate them. So they're coming back at the campus and want more money back. And they want compensation for their loss of the ability to have freedom of speech, especially on a campus. So they filed a federal lawsuit. Which is kind of weird in itself. Because in the state of California, I've known this for a long while, and I got educated into the system back in the 80s when I first got myself into the system, that they've always had this at-will policy. Any employer hiring anybody else will have a justification of termination at any point in the course of the employment there. Basically, if you do something, say something, look something, the employer has the permission, the employer has the will, the employer has the power of saying, bye-bye, here's your final paycheck, enjoy. I've had that happen to me too many damn times. And usually because of stupidity. My own damn actions. Even happens when you're a temp as well. So I've worked for corporations, I've worked for smaller companies, I've worked for larger corporations. The thing of it is, I worked at companies that the federal government looked at as saying these companies are not government entities. They are not lawmaking law enforcement, any of that ilk, because they are an entity. Now, I don't know how the at-will company will be affecting public institutions, but as long as I understand it, if they're getting a paycheck out of them, then they're considered an at-will company. And the thing of it is, the federal government also has a problem concerning about federal monies being handed over, and the federal government not given the hand necessary. Would you get out of here, damn bugs? Yeah, I'm dealing with damn bugs all over the damn place. So, real life drama compared to drama seeing in print. There's no comparisons because I'm dealing with cockroaches. Anyway, that's going to bite me in the ass. I know that. One way or another. In my own opinion at this point, since I'm not a legal professional, I'm just a student and observer of everything, the lawsuit's going to get tossed out. Not because of their political viewpoints, not because of them being conservative in their nature. They're entitled to it. They want to be conservative? That's their right. They want to say conservative stuff? That's their right. They have the freedom of speech to do so. And the only thing is, there's always a catch on this. Because if they're going against a government system and they get curtailed with their freedom of speech, then that's one thing having a federal lawsuit. But if we're dealing with a company who's already giving them paycheck after paycheck after paycheck, or an at-will company within the state of California, that's an issue. Because the state of California will be coming up and biting them in the ass on this one. But no, they're going to be suing these. They're going to be suing a college district or college campus itself regarding this situation. And I got a feeling they're going to lose. They're going to lose big time. Now, if this was considered part of the public government system or an educational system, maybe they would have a chance for the freedom of speech at this point over here. But the thing of it is, the campus is not an enforcement or law-creating entity. They are an educational system. It's like any other school systems we've got out here. They are subject to state and federal guidelines left and right. But they are considered an employer because they give paychecks to workers, to contract workers, to people who fill out a contract for a certain amount of time, for a certain amount of work. If this had been the city of Bakersfield versus these professors, then that's another thing altogether, because now we're seeing a basis concerning about freedom of speech issues at this point. I'm not trying to say this is social bashing. This is political bashing. I'm saying this as an observation at this point over here. They're going to lose because the college itself is considered an employer, and under the state laws, they're an at-will company, and therefore they're going to be terminating contracts left and right. But I know about the political bias system at this point over here, and there's no law against political biasm. Of course, they could feel like they're getting their asses kicked left and right because of this, because they're not following the same game plan. And that could be a basis right there for the freedom of speech on a campus. Does the campus have a right to curtail their freedom of speech? Would be the question. If the federal district courts look at it as an employer basis, I don't think the two people doing the lawsuits are going to have issues. I mean, they're going to get their court case probably dismissed. But if they do find there's some valid points in it, then it's going to be opening up something else for the private sector as well, because now we got to deal with that. Now we have a basis here to go back through the SCOTUS systems if we have enough cases going on throughout the country to form a basis of saying corporations need federal guidance, which means they would need to have laws passed by Congress and signed by the executive branch. Because now we've got federal jurisdiction over this. Now we've got interpretation over this. Now we're getting precedent because of the cases presenting this left and right. It could go that way, or it could just be dismissed left and right. Either way, this should be something interesting to see. Now, personally, for me, seeing this, yes, I am liberal. But I'm not implying and I'm not demanding people to be of that nature all the damn time. If they want to think conservative and say conservative things, they have the right to do so. They have the right to express themselves to people. The First Amendment right guarantees that. But the thing is that we have consequences to that. And the First Amendment law does not protect you from consequences. It gives you the right, but it doesn't guarantee that you're not going to be bit in the ass. Hard. Case in point, you're putting up remarks all over a campus concerning about your beliefs in something. Now, it's depending on whether or not you're a student or you're faculty. If you're faculty, you signed paperwork for this. If you're a student, then the school is considered a public entity, and there are certain guidelines that they will accept. Back. Opposition. Opposition crawling all over the place must squish them left crazy. I am a liberal. I will squish out the conservative. Smash it with a foot. Means I just need to get this place bug bombed, that's all. But if I'm a student going to be saying stuff like that, I am guaranteed to a certain point how much freedom of speech I can say without it going full tilt boogie on this one. And it has to be approved by the school board. Well, by the college board anyway. College campus. They would have their own authoritative board or an advisory board to let them know that this would be acceptable as freedom of speech as long as it conforms up to a certain guideline. As I said before, the campuses are not known for being law enforcement or lawmaking. They are only giving students a semblance of freedom of speech to have them voice out their constitutional rights. And they also would give the employees that same courtesy as long as it doesn't violate any policies that's already been set out. Now, when it comes down for fiscal management of the policies, that's a different story altogether. If the cases were brought to the lower courts, to the state courts, are concerning about their grant system, that's one thing. But they brought out the freedom of speech, so they're going to get squashed. If they were saying something about in the court systems, if I'm looking at it. I said before, I'm not a legal expert of anyway, so don't think of me as Perry Mason, alright? This is not law and order. This is me understanding the law as best as I can, and I'm a rank amateur. I am Joe Public at this point over here, looking at an entity, trying to decide whether or not they're going to keep people in there or not because of their viewpoints. As I said before, they only give them some semblance. They only give them so much rope before they get them hung, verbally. So you can say whatever you want to a point. Past that point, past that guideline, past that acceptable barrier, then that's it. But then the question would be, what is the acceptable barrier? It comes back down to the place that we're dealing with. If we're dealing with a corporate entity, they only have so much legal room, and then afterwards, FUBAR. But if we're dealing with if we are dealing with an entity regarding law enforcement or law giving, if we're dealing with, say, for example, maybe if you are going against a ruling body of the city itself, that's one thing. The city is considered a governmental entity, and therefore, because they make their own rules and regulations, their own laws, they are considered government, and the First Amendment speeches would be valid against them. A college isn't. A college will be considered like any other federal institute. There's a difference between institute and government system here. The government system, as we're looking here, versus an institution here. The institution being a college board. Now, there hasn't been any federal college systems out there, only state. But the government itself, the ones that are making the rules and regulations, the ones that got the power, the ones that handle out the money, take in the money, does the services, does the real enforcement. Catch my drift? So let's just say if the city of Bakersfield itself got sued versus a community college of Bakersfield. They're two separate entities. The city itself is considered an employer at one point, but it's also considered a government agency. Now, it's tricky regarding this situation here because if you are employed by the city itself or by the state or by the federal, you are subject under the federal rules and regulations. They are considered an employer. Understand that? Employer. Much like the college is an employer. Now you're saying, wait a second, if I work for the Social Security Department, say for example, I work for the government, I still have freedom of speech. There's a problem, because I know the legal scholars will have a field day over this damn thing. Even if they have to look at this video, they're going to be having a field day over this damn thing. As I said before, I'm an observer on this stuff. I'm not an expert. I'm a student of sorts. So, observations may be a little bit skewed, but as I understand it here, if you happen to work for an entity, it also depends upon if we're dealing with federal or beyond the federal or under the federal, such as state or private. They're considered subject to that state's laws regarding employment. And also, with the federal government, you're under the federal you're under the federal system there on how they treat employees. Totally different. Totally different than what the case I was presenting earlier on. It makes me question about a lot of things. And yes, as long as I understand the legal basis of what's approved and what's not approved, I'm not trying to look at it as a liberal situation. I'm looking at under the legal situation. And the laws are usually written by people, by political parties, or subject under the political parties, but they're written by people. They are voted in, or they are made into law by governing bodies, by authorizing government bodies for that. Shall I call them that one? But I just wanted to get this point cleared. Because these particular professors I don't know of, this particular school system I don't know of. I've heard of them. Even though they're about 2.5 hours away from me, I have another system that I'm under. They'll probably be considered as the same as liberal. And if they actually got into the same situation, I'd be arguing the same case or case type. Because now we're dealing with a corporate entity or a company entity here. It's a private, even though they're accepting public. But even under public, they would still be under public scrutiny because the public would have the right according to what some people have said, to make that kind of determination. And that's why they have advisory committees. That's why they have governing boards from people from all walks of life, from both the academia and the public, to make those kind of decisions on how the school is supposed to be governed. Much like the college that's being criticized and being sued, and maybe some few entities in there too, private entities, regarding this freedom of speech situation. If their governing board had decided, my observations and my own thoughts, if the governing board had decided to vote for the money to be allocated in one way or another, public money, there should have been a public debate. This should have been brought up to the public for the public to respond. If there was any opposition at that point, it should have been there. But since the opposition decided not to bring in their case to the board at any point, if there was supposed to be a meeting at that point, that was supposed to have been a meeting. It was all arranged, but they didn't do a no-show. They did a no-show. The ones who filed the lawsuit did a no-show, which means they told the board in one way that they don't care. So the board had no choice. Without an opposition, without hearing a separate, they went along and did whatever they wanted to do. If there was supposed to be a public debate, there was no debate because the people are supposed to be debating against the actions happening at the school. They didn't happen. But they took their own case to the public. And that's where the contention for the First Amendment situation is right there. They decided on their own initiative to do that. And well, they should if the First Amendment was going to be applied at this point. They still have a semblance of it, but they were given an opportunity. Of course, they could have just protested outside as well. But it would have been better if the public actually heard both sides of the argument. And I think what they were fearing is the public or body would not hear them even if they talked about it. Even if they brought up their issue to the governing board of what their issue was concerning about how money was being spent at a college. They felt the money was being misappropriated and sent to people with a different like-minded. That should have been said to the public, and they tried to do that, but their own way, instead of bringing it up to the board and saying, this is what we feel. And if they're fearing a reprisal at that point, and they feel like we have to bring it up a different way, that's their major contention for the First Amendment rights. Did they have the right to do so? If we're dealing with going against a government agency, they would have the right to do so. The problem is they're an employer. It's a private entity. Even though it is a public situation, it is still a private entity. Much like the school board at this point. If you happen to have an issue with a teacher and you're a parent, it's one thing. You're outside the system, but you're inside the system. And you're getting a paycheck from it. So you still have to bring it up to the chain of command. You still have to go through the chain of command to do so. You're dealing with an at-will company that has its own chain of command and mediation. And if you still can't do this, well, naturally you have to go outside the board, outside the box, and present your own case to the public. Once you're outside their control, if you're outside their contract, in my own opinion, they would not have been able to retaliate. But now they felt like they got retaliated because they couldn't say anything within the system, and it was reported they were given opportunities for that. Therefore, this is a reason why we're going to have to keep an eye on it. I'm going to really have to keep an eye on this one because I want to see how the First Amendment plays out. Regarding an at-will company that still receives public education, because this is going to have a precedent that's going to happen anywhere else. This is going to be among those. So this is going to be something that the legal students are going to have fun with, in my own opinion. Now, for me personally, if it was just considered an at-will company, they're dead. Scratch that. Their case would be not considered worthy to be reviewed. And they could have the court of public opinion. That's about it. They can say whatever they want. And then again, there's going to be the libel situation happening, coming back from the campus after the people who started the lawsuit in the first place. And they would have a problem in the civil courts regarding this. Not the federal district courts, even though they could do it in the federal district courts, saying that their freedom of speech has been wiped out. They're probably doing it to the lower courts at this point over here. So, as I said before, we're going to see how this plays out. We're going to have to see how this plays out in the court systems, whether or not, if the judge is going to rule that the course is legal, valid, and has merit to continue on. Because if it does, that's going to set a precedent. If the court gets tossed out, it means the instructors would have no choice but to go through the court of public opinion at this point and present their case, whatever they've got, and realize that the campus could come up and bite them in the ass. And they'll have to put it either back in the federal court or in the state's court, in the court of the state Supreme Court, and have them rule it. Of course, they're going to say this is going to be violating my First Amendment rights. Once more, bounced out of the state and back into the federal again. And whether or not of a different district judge or the same judge is going to be ruling on the same case all over again. Whether or not the new material is going to be worthy enough to be going forward, or if it's going to be dropped, kicked again. And whether or not this particular court, this particular judge is going to have a field day or not. I don't know. This ought to be interesting to see anyway, and I got to keep track of this case. Because I want to see how this plays out regarding First Amendment rights, because I know this is going to be affecting anybody and everybody out there. Regarding at-will companies, not to mention people contracted with at-will companies. How are they going to be dealt with? How is this particular legal precedent going to be applied? If the case gets tossed out, well, then we know one way. If the case gets continued on, it's going to be depending upon a jury or the judge. And according to the lawsuit, a jury is selected, which means we need 12 public citizens to make the determination whether or not if freedom of speech was being impaled by a corporate entity, or by a public entity for that matter. At the time, they were an employer under the state of California. The prosecution is going to have a field day over this one. And the defense, which is probably just the school system and the people involved in that one, they're going to have an issue over this one too. So these are the kind of things I look forward to talking about, because they affect me and usually affect my studies, because it makes me look more and more at the world and how it still runs. Now me, I'm 55 years old. I've seen a lot of things happen, and I've heard too many different court cases happening left and right that goes over to my damn head. But some of them actually do stick. And this is going to be one of those cases. So, without ado, night owls, I'll put you back into bed while I deal with the nocturnal critters of the floor that creep around and drive you crazy.